article was published in the New York Times. President Trump is planning to approach differently so the Israeli-Palestinian issue, mostly focusing in the attempt to involve in much more proactively Arab states like Saudi Arabia and Egypt in the process. If accurate, I would say that in my evaluation, this is the right approach towards this issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thus far, all the attempts to really try and to conduct the direct negotiations between the sides are failed, and they are doomed to fail because the two sides are actually located on different places in terms of their political willingness and ability to compromise, their inner discussion, the inner pressures and needs, and so on and so on. In fact, the method that apparently is suggested by the Trump administration regarding the next phase of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to a large extent resonates or echoes an article that I published a couple of months ago with Forbes, basically suggesting what I call an out-of-the-box thinking in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And one of my major arguments was, and is, that in the end of the day, you cannot expect a real positive breakthrough in the process without the real proactive involvement of the major states, mostly talking about Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf Council Cooperation Council, and Jordan. And it seems indeed that more and more today the conditions, because of what's going on in the Middle East, are right for such a move. One should bear in mind that the Palestinians are part of the Arab world. They are predominantly, of course, Sunnis, and hence they are very much tuned to the messages coming out from the Arab. As of today, the Arab world is mostly engaged in two major challenges. One is the inner challenges of the societies of the people of the Arab states, in Egypt, in the Gulf states, in Jordan, elsewhere. And the second one, of course, is the attempt to try and to block and minimize the growing regional aggressive policy of the Iranian mullah regime and its Shiite proxies in different parts of the region. That is the reason why today there are interesting circumstances that brings to the table, for the first time actually, a long-term strategic interest that basically joins together Israel and the major Arab states, and the Palestinians are very well tuned to the messages coming out from the Arab. It has been quite common to assume in the Western circles of powers that the Middle East reality is to a large extent shaped by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That is a misaccurate reading of the reality. In fact, it's the other way around. It is the Middle East that shapes the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, not the other way. And as of today, because of the circumstances that I just mentioned, there is an interesting opportunity for both Israelis and Palestinians to make a kind of like a positive progress in the path of maybe later on down the road having the ability to have some arrangements or agreements on the ground. I do not use the term peace agreement because it's totally irrelevant at this point. Rather, I'm talking about conducting a progressive, a positive progress in the context of this negotiations or relations between both Israelis and the Palestinians. In my article published at Forbes, I have Gaza Strip as an example. Gaza Strip is controlled since June 2007 by the Islamic Palestinian radical movement called Hamas, Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya. Hamas formally defined itself as the branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine and stands for a very non-compromising, hostile ideology towards the state of Israel. Hamas will never ever compromise its hostility towards the state of Israel, and Hamas calls upon the elimination of the state of Israel, preferably by the use of violence. That is not going to change. However, Hamas is not also going to disappear. Hamas is a major factor within the Palestinian society today, controls Gaza Strip, with a significant presence in the West Bank as well. And though Hamas is currently engaged in a conflict with the Palestinian Authority, Hamas is not going anywhere, and therefore we have to take into consideration that fact. However, Hamas with the fact that it's a radical militant group, is also tuned to the messages that comes out from different parts of the Middle East, mostly the Arab world, and Hamas knows to do the math. Hamas is tuned to the messages that are coming from Egypt, from Saudi Arabia, from the Gulf states, and that's the reason why I believe that in the end of the day, bringing in the big players in the region could, and in fact, should be the only right way if we really want to make a positive breakthrough in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So going back to the example of Gaza Strip, Gaza Strip has been for the last couple of years, ever since Hamas took over, a major source of threat to Israel. There has been a couple of military rounds. Each one of them is more severe than the other. The outcomes of these military rounds were obviously very tragic, both on the Israeli side as well, of course, on the Palestinian side. The meaning of that is that from an Israeli perspective, there can be no positive progress in any kind in the context of the Gaza Strip as long as Israelis are not convinced that the security threat that Gaza Strip presents to Israel today under the control of Hamas is going to be eliminated or at least minimized substantially. That cannot happen as long as Hamas is the only player in the Gaza Strip. In order to change that reality, we need the involvement of Arab states in that context, because the meaning of that is that if we will have proactive participation of Arab states in shaping the reality of the Gaza Strip and mostly restraining Hamas, and they have the ability to restrain Hamas, that could encourage Israeli leaders to be more generous and forthcoming with their willingness and ability to conduct compromise when it comes to the context of the Gaza Strip, because Gaza Strip is indeed in a bad need for substantial answers for some very acute and relevant questions and problems, such, for example, everyday life conditions, provision of supply of electricity, consumption of electricity, the need of the Gaza people to be able to move freely from one place to another. The only passage that connects Gaza Strip to the Arab world is the one controlled by Egypt and Rafah, and this passage most of the time is closed. The bottom line is very simple. In order to create the conditions that will enable both sides, we're talking now in the context of Gaza Strip, to be able to move forward to expand their maneuvering capacity and therefore be able to create conditions on the ground that will, on the one hand, minimize the threat of another yet military round, but on the other hand also will increase the odds for arrangements, practical arrangements. I'm not talking about peace solution as of now. I'm talking about practical arrangements on the ground. In order to achieve those conditions and those supportive environment, the involvement of Arab states is crucial. One cannot expect any positive progress in that context without the involvement of the Arab states. One more thing which is very substantial, and I mentioned it before, it should be elaborated a little bit. As the Arab states are today engaged in most of the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia are engaged in an attempt to block the aggressive, violent expansion of the Iranian mullah regime through the use of proxies in the region. One of the major things that bothers the Arab world is to make sure that the Iranian mullah regime will not continue, as it did so far, use the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a stage to further fuel instability and violence. Well, as I said before about the Gaza Strip, I believe that if we try to continue the line that I was presenting, my suggestion in the context of the Gaza Strip is to deploy military forces of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Egyptian forces, maybe even Saudi forces, together with forces of the Palestinian Authority, as well as Hamas forces, because Hamas is not going to disappear, and to create this situation in the Gaza Strip where Israelis will not view the Gaza Strip as a source of a constant growing military threat. Therefore, that way, Israeli leaders will have a bigger maneuvering capacity to apply or to offer or to suggest much more generous moves on the ground. For example, the opening of a harbor in the Gaza Strip, one of the demands that continually is being made by the Palestinians. In other words, to conclude my presentation, I would say, if one wants to really have a positive breakthrough in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it has to be done in the context of the widened development that is going on today in the Middle East. And in that context, in my argument, there can be no breakthrough and positive progress without the proactive involvement of the major Arab states. Therefore, going back to my opening statement, I believe that the path allegedly picked by Trump administration by adopting the proactive and encouraging the proactive involvement of Arab states in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that model has a better odds of success in comparison to other models thus far. This is Avi Milamed. Thank you for listening and watching.
Thank you, Avi. Bye.